This is a unusual broadcast station that I ordinarily don't never listen to. Occasionally, from time to time, I'll thumb through it and see and listen and then go on about my business. But this time, the subject matter that they was talking about, I found it to be very, very appealing and attractive due to the fact that some people on various news agencies will put out the facts about the ongoing occurrences that a lot of people won't put out there because they're told not to put stuff like that out there. So will give people a different perspective on what's going on with the year anniversary coming up in regard towards President Putin and the Ukrainians, of all the suffering and the death and the destruction that this individual has bestowed upon a great deal of innocent lives. What you are going to hear is a different approach upon to the tactic that we are basically cutting our own noses off to despite our faces in a way. I mean, don't get me wrong, I understand why we're doing it. But in a way, we're actually exacerbating the problem by trying to head off the problem the way that we're heading it off with all these embargoes, because it's basically leaving Putin at the point of having to make a choice of either reaching out and trying to find somebody like the China leader, or possibly going into the full rim of a nuclear war to begin with. So, these channels, whenever Putin keeps saying it's the Western world that's provoking it, in a charismatic type way, I can actually see what he's talking about, how that they feel like that they're being cornered because of what America is doing, but at the same time, it's they themselves that can't see that they're the ones that basically throw the first blow towards attacking the Ukrainians to begin with. So it's the blind leading the blind. And unless we've got smart enough people to look at this, analyze it, and decipher it in the correct way, we're only going to continue to keep digging our holes a little deeper and deeper and deeper till eventually we will bury ourselves. Please listen.
The idea that we're going to send in offensive equipment and have planes and tanks and trains going in with American pilots and American crews, just understand, and don't kid yourself, no matter what you all say, that's called World War III, okay? Let's get it straight here, guys. Today, I'm announcing that the United States will be sending 31 Abrams tanks to Ukraine.
Okay, so are we in World War III? Is this the early stage of it? One of the smartest human beings I know, especially when it comes to that region, is my friend Boris Rifkin of Monofly Holdings and the Get Deals Done newsletter. Boris, okay, we said it was going to be World War III. We sent them. It doesn't feel like World War III, but maybe we're in some kind of soft cyber version of World War. Where are you when it comes to U.S.-Russia relations right now? Obviously, they're not good.
I think that the World War III card has been overplayed to some degree in terms of on the Russian side. In other words, it's in their interest to continue to increase the rhetoric, to sharpen it, to offset the problems that they have at the front and their diminished capabilities, essentially. So it's rhetoric as a Potemkin village almost strategy to conceal their own problems and the worsening situation in Ukraine for them right now, practically. So in reality, that's why Putin, for example, keeps defaulting to the nuclear card. You notice that it's sort of a diminishing return on using it, because he threatened to use it if we send any heavy weapons to Ukraine at all. He threatened that there would be consequences if we sent the HIMARS, if we sent the anti-ship missiles that were used to sink their battle cruiser Moskva in the Black Sea. He threatened consequences if we increase the range of the howitzers and the long-range artillery that we would be sending to them, sending them more of those. And he said the same thing, that there would be consequences, and his former president of Russia, who's now really kind of a pathetic sap mouthpiece, Dmitry Medvedev, threatened all sorts of consequences, that the world would end if the tanks were sent, if the Germans signed off on sending the Leopard tanks that the Ukrainians wanted. So the more that we have pushed the envelope, the response has been largely rhetorical. So nothing has fundamentally changed from the Russian side militarily. They haven't upped the ante because I think they can't. And to a large extent, that has nothing really to do with Biden and what we're doing. It has to do with Russia's own internal problems and what Putin realistically can and can't do. So what Putin is essentially doing right now is he's telling his generals to accomplish political objectives for him. So by the 1-year anniversary coming up at the end of the month, he told his generals, I want a couple of politically important positions in Ukraine, in the Donbass region, like Bakhmut, where there's a huge amount of fighting going on right now. I want those positions taken. I want something that I could spin on the 1-year anniversary as a big political victory for me, in light of the reality that the Russians have now lost north of 200,000, probably approaching 250,000 dead, wounded, and captured in Ukraine in 1 year. So in context, what does that mean for the Russians? So the Soviet Union lost about 10,000 killed in 9 years fighting in Afghanistan during the Soviet-Afghan War. So it's that's about 3 or 4 times what they lost in the 2 Chechen wars put together at this point. The first one under Yeltsin and the second one under Putin. So you basically just put that in context. That was the Soviet Union in Afghanistan. Here you have Russia, which has, the Soviet Union had about 300 million people. Russia now today has 140 million. And they lost 10,000 killed. The number killed in Ukraine is about 60 to 70,000. So it's a disaster, and they don't have anything else. As far as equipment, technologically to offset that in any way. But Putin is setting these political objectives, and his generals are in panic, but they are terrified. They are doing what they can because there's a lot of, to appease the Tsar, if you will, to appease Putin, there are a lot of these factional battles that are happening inside the Kremlin, each trying to kind of undermine his political rival, be it this guy who's the head of the Wagner Group, which is this mercenary private army, the chairman of their equivalent of the chairman of the Joint Chiefs, Gerasimov, chief of the general staff. Then you have the hapless defense minister, Shoigu, who's never served a day in his life in the army. You think it's kind of like some of the people we have in our military, but this guy never served a day in the army, and of course, because he was a Putin crony, he became defense minister. So his main job was robbing the defense budget, and now we're seeing what's going on there. So you have to separate the political rhetoric of Putin himself from what's actually happening on the ground and what they can do. And the final point on that, in terms of what more could happen here, like how close are we to the brink because we're hearing this. And when I said it's not as much to do with us, China is a huge restraining force on Putin. So aside from Putin's own internal limitations and what's happening within the Russian army and its inability to achieve anything that he really wants it to achieve strategically, the Chinese are a huge restraining force on Putin. So Xi basically told Putin, do not use nukes. That there's been a lot of behind the scenes pressure. So the Chinese are helping Russia in some areas, but they're a huge restraining force on them in other areas. So the Chinese want a Russia that's sort of weakened and prodding. That would be a Russia where they kind of have them where they want them. That would actually be useful to the Chinese. But if this escalates into them using even tactical nuclear weapons in Ukraine at all, that would be really, really problematic for the Chinese across the board. So they've been trying to get Putin to not go that far. So, and another interesting point, kind of to close that off, in terms of their capabilities. There was, I think it was about 5 or 6 years ago, maybe longer, the former deputy prime minister, who was later the head of the Russian equivalent of NASA, Roscosmos, their space agency, and he was the deputy prime minister in charge of defense issues, and he gave a speech to their equivalent of the Pentagon and said that, and this was supposed to be off the record, but somebody filmed it and it was disseminated, that in his estimation, the U.S. could, within a matter of hours, knock out 80 to 90% of Russia's nuclear capacity with conventional weapons. So with targeted long-range conventional weapons with targeted missile strikes, without us even having to contemplate any kind of nuclear retaliation or second strike or anything before they do anything. So before a single Russian nuclear device even gets off the ground, we have the conventional capability of destroying 80 to 90% of that capacity without any further problems. And he admitted this to their equivalents of the Pentagon. So they're fully aware of the disconnect between what they're saying as far as the nuclear threats and the gulf in capabilities between us and them. So you kind of have to keep all of those things in mind when you hear a lot of these scare stories, I think, about World War III being imminent.
Boris, finally, politically, you mentioned Putin's vulnerable politically, and I continue to hear this. He's vulnerable, he's vulnerable. We Americans, we like to imagine this all-powerful autocrat who has total control of everything. Why is a guy like that in trouble politically?
Well, I don't know if, to be honest, I think that that kind of dovetails to these rumors. Is Putin ill? Does he have cancer? Like, what's his staying power? What's going on? I wouldn't put too much credence into that. I think that it's too early to think about who might succeed Putin. What I can say is, or what's his real standing in the Kremlin. I think that for now, there's no one really who could challenge him directly. There are a couple of people who might together, but Putin has been able to set up a very specialized scheme. Obviously, he was a former KGB colonel. He understands what happened to Gorbachev when they attempted to overthrow him in 1991. Putin is very careful to keep close tabs on everyone around him. He hates them. He doesn't trust them. This is, a late stage. He's been there for over 20 years. He suspects plots and attempted coups at every turn, behind every rock. And so he's very careful not to allow any potential rivals to gang up on him. So I wouldn't really put too much weight into that. And more importantly, the aspiration of Putin's successor being some kind of a enlightened pro-Western Democrat, I think we shouldn't keep our hopes up on that either. I think really what I can say is that, he does use body doubles, that we know. He does keep his senior advisors, across these mile-long tables because he's literally has all these phobias. He's just terrified of them being around him. So he has a special armored train that's prepared to, like Kim Jong-un, that he, so that's to not have too many people close to him. So he's taking every precaution he possibly can. I don't give too much weight to any of these rumors, but what I would probably say is that the war in Ukraine currently, whether it expands or doesn't, or there's some kind of strategic operational change in the battlefield, if you will, the war in Ukraine will continue politically so long as Putin is in the Kremlin. So for Putin, he is ideologically possessed with this Ukraine issue and has been for far longer than a lot of our commentators and officials, I think, have given him credit for. And when somebody is ideologically possessed with something, rational thinking goes out the window, which is why he's continuing to insist on all these really unachievable, deranged political objectives, which have no aren't militarily realizable. He doesn't care, so he wants to keep going.
I want to weigh in on what he's talking about here. I don't know that any of the statistics that this individual, this news anchor man here, this commentator is talking about, I don't know if the statistics are on the money pertaining to the numbers. Whenever you go back and you look at what went on in certain characteristics towards the initial agreement that happened during and of Ronald Reagan's administration. I just know this as a witness pertaining to the testimony that was given to the White House in 1988 in regards towards 9 cassette tapes. Cassette tapes come after the 8-track tapes, which, was a big advancement in technology at that time towards going from basically RCA records to radio and then conventional tape players. I just know that our United States government spoke out of both sides of its mouth at the same time in regards towards convincing the superpowers, which it's not just Russia, it's like 5 of them that has these type of capabilities, convincing them that the world was not going to be destroyed by man, pertaining to nuclear war, but that it was going to be destroyed the way that the Bible predicts for it to be destroyed, in regards towards the New World Order, the opening of the seals, in regards towards the two witnesses, the mark of the beast, in regards towards the false prophet, the actual Antichrist that'll bring forth the mark 666 and all the above. Basically, the very exact teachings that Jesus taught that was going to occur, they said was going to occur. The only problem was nobody was willing to support that movement that began strictly as an ideology, because whenever I was growing up as a child, that's basically all I was taught growing up, was about the New World Order, the one world government, the Antichrist, the false prophet, the mark of the beast, the two witnesses, 666, and all the above. I was taught as a child, not just in one classification of church, but in almost all of them that I went to, had some form or fashion of doctrine that leaned towards these major events that was supposed to have occurred. The only problem was, whenever they did start to occur, the individual that's talking to you right now that was assigned by God towards being the messenger, nobody wanted to support. Nobody wanted to back up. Nobody wanted to partner up. Nobody wanted to get entwined. Though they said one thing that they believed, but in reality, they didn't act upon it. All they basically done was put me out there on a limb to dry, and I was taking pot shots at all these other different organizations, regardless whether it was the organizations in Kentucky or the organizations in Oklahoma or the organizations out in Atlanta, Georgia, in which I was fortunate that the problems that initiated in Atlanta, Georgia didn't escalate, but it could have possibly have. But they was basically throwing me out there on the limb towards defending for myself. And of course, whenever you're a one-man pony show, and they know that you're a one-man pony show, you automatically become vulnerable. To where if I was a Joe Osteen, just going to throw his name out there real quick as an example, if I was a Joe Osteen with 40,000+ attendants or followers or supporters, they would be more hesitant towards not coming after me than they would be somebody that's a one-man pony show. Well, that's exactly what the people right here in Northwest Tennessee wanted me to be. They wanted me to be a one-man pony show. They expected or anticipated for my failures. That's what they wanted. Because of their hard-headedness, or because of they themselves that didn't have a true relationship with the Heavenly Father that was willing to die for Christ, the same as Christ was willing to die for us. Or they was convinced, because of the supernatural, wicked sorcery type powers that was dealing with this situation, they was convinced that I was wrong and they was right, or that my biological father, James Robert Jackson, was a good, outstanding individual, in which I'm not going to disagree that my dad had a lot of good quality traits about him, but he also had a lot of bad. And for the people around here to have been bamboozled into what he was doing, especially whenever he attacked me after my life was basically hanging in the balances at the time, and the way that the authorities over in Kenton, Tennessee blackballed me or branded me, that created an atmosphere that started snowballing in my life. And of course, Homeland Security in 1989 got in behind of it. Homeland Security in 1991 up in Wheeling, West Virginia got in behind of it. And the way that authority figures band together is that you got certain people on the top that are supposed to know exactly what they're saying and doing is correct. And those at the bottom end are supposed to take the orders from the ones on top end. That's the way authority works. Authority starts at the top and initially bleeds or goes down trickles down to the bottom. Well, whenever you have Homeland Security, the United States government, that's steadily pumping out information about an individual, the individual is talking to you right now and behind the camera, whenever you got them steadily pumping out all this false information about this individual, who do you think they're going to believe? You think they're going to believe me as an individual, or you think they're supposed to believe the authorities that was in a higher position than them? Exactly. So where the conspiracy actually began, that I continue to keep talking about, is with the presidential administration, beginning with the Reagans and the Bushes, that has basically deformed our way of life to the degree of what we're dealing with right now on every level, from gun shootings to drug overdoses to illegal immigrants to now possibly going to war with the Russians in a direct way. So there's no doubt some of the moves that the American politicians are playing right now in the hand of the Ukrainians towards the hand against the Russians are actually counterproductive, because eventually, as I've said before, you can run a fox to his home, but you can't run him from his home. Once these individuals feel like that they have been cornered or entrapped by the Western world, they will turn towards one or two things. They will either go nuclear, 100%, or they'll reach out to somebody like China that will support their endeavors. And of course, whenever you get to looking at our civilian mindset here in America, whenever it comes to enacting the draft or whatever, you think that it was an uproar whenever Putin enacted the draft pertaining to his citizens over there. If you was to do something like that over here, you would see a migration flow of either going back to Mexico by a great deal of the Americans. I don't think that the Mexicans would go back to the environment that they had been subjected to, because they know what type of environment that goes on down there. You would either see them go to Mexico or try to head towards Canada, or possibly go up into other parts of the country, maybe up to Alaska or wherever. You would see a massive migration. Why? Because the vast majority of the people, the civilian life, they talk the talk, but basically none of them are willing to walk the walk. And the reason why I know this is because I have personally, on hands, experienced this for the past 30 plus years that I have now been out in the eyes of the general public. They have basically made a horrible mistake, just as Mike Pence talks about. And the mistake that they're talking about isn't just the mistake that happened on January the 6th. The mistake that they're talking about isn't just the fact of creating all the climate deniers over here that was steadily against the world heating up for the past 35, 40 years. Even whenever Al Gore stepped on to the stage towards running for presidency, they was still steadily against climate deniers, towards accusing him of being an owl lover or a tree hugger or something to that degree. But now they finally realized that they have failed in whatever attempt that they was trying to achieve. And I'm just going to put this out there. This is how I feel. They know that they have failed in their attempts towards achieving what they was trying to achieve by conforming the Afghanistan people in a 20-year war. And once that all blowed up in their faces, to the degree that the Afghanistan people was not willing to fight for the liberties that obviously the Ukrainians are willing to fight for, then the American government was looking for another pansy, was looking for another scapegoat. Why? Because they knowed that they had messed up. It's easier to get us involved in something that will be major, that will be nothing but a distraction towards getting everybody's minds off of one thing onto another. It would be easier to do that than it would be to come clean. So rather than them coming clean, they're actually anticipating that this madman over there, because they have found now they have found now a hubba bubba, which is the president of Ukraine. He's now turned into their hubba bubba because him and his people are willing to die for a good cause. So now the American government is going in behind, piggybacking onto his endeavors, hoping that a major conflict will arise to the degree that maybe, just maybe, the United States government, from the upper end all the way down to the lower end, to the counties, will gain control back over the situation that has been out of control now for the past 30 plus years. It's a very horrible thing to think about, that various people are willing to do this all in exchange of their own personal mistakes. But I've seen it a time again and again and again, because I'm soon to be 62, March 22nd on my birthday, and I idly stood by and watched Pat Robinson's ministry become a flaming fortune. I've seen Oral Robertson's ministry become a flame of fortune. I've seen PTL, pertaining to Jim Baker and Tammy Baker, become a flame of fortune. I've seen Billy Graham's ministry become a flame of fortune. I've seen other international, national ministries become a flame of fortune because various politicians with various money got in behind that ministry and basically used that ministry as an scapegoat towards the last days, the last day message, the end times, that basically validated their moves towards seeing the destruction in people's lives, just to be able to regain control over the things that they had lost control over. And that can be looked upon towards the Korean War, the Vietnam War, the Desert Shield, Desert Storm, and the Afghanistan War, and 2 or 3 other events that happened whenever the ministry took hold, whatever ministry it was that they was promoting. The only problem is that the individual who's talking to you right now on the back of the camera is onto them in every degree towards their senseless wickedness that they have been a part of, in basically putting innocent lives at bay. Rather than putting their own lives out there, they go for volunteers, or they use the draft theory, okay? Now, granted, whenever it comes to societies being evil, I guarantee you the American government is just as evil as the Russian government or any other major superpower government out there whenever it comes to their flexibility in doing what they want to do, for whatever reason that they want to do it in. They'll twist it, turn it, mangle it, manipulate it any way that they want to. Now, they say that Putin is saying and doing what Putin is doing, in which 99.9% of the stuff that they're talking about, I believe. But I also believe this, that the Russian government has a valid reason by saying that the American people had lied to them and that they had been cheated. And it wasn't so much that the American people had cheated them, but it was the politicians that was calling the shots that was cheating the endeavors of the original concept, or the indoctrination that they was promoting on the front end towards the Antichrist, the one world government, the New World Order, that the Russians, they themselves, never seen the manifestation of. They never seen it. So because they never seen these things, it leads them to believe that it was the people over here in America that deliberately manipulated or lied to them about the Antichrist, about the opening of the first seal, about the things that they've been teaching and talking about now for years and years and years, ever since I was knee-high to a grasshopper, but nobody was willing to act upon to them. So by me saying all of that, I don't even know that the American people, for the vast part, even realizes or knows what's going on here. You know, whenever I talk about the mind, the reason why that I put so much emphasis upon the mind whenever I was a kid growing up was because the way that my brother died was basically he died of mind death before he died of a physical death. And he died in the process towards an assignment that was given to him towards taking me up to Dresden, Tennessee to gather 50 Diamond-Necker 4-H chickens that I had won, that in the process of doing that, my brother wound up dead. So naturally, whenever it comes to the mind, because that's basically how he died, he was brain dead, and they done like 3 or 4 EEGs on his head before they realized that, hey, this guy's going to wind up being a vegetable the rest of his life. What are we going to do? Are we going to keep him on a machine, or are we going to pull the plug? Well, in the process of all that, I had to make that same decision. What would I have wanted my own personal brother to have done if the shoe was on the other foot? I wouldn't have wanted to live on a machine. The quality of my life would have been that way. But it took me a long, long time to ever get to the acceptance of that, because on the front end of all that, I blame myself for his death because he was on that assignment. But in doing so, I've learned the stability of the mind. I have seen where the Egyptians, thousands of years ago, possibly actually performed brain surgery on people because they have found skulls with perfectly round indentions in the top of their skull, where obviously something was going on. I have seen where other groups of people would put pressure on people's skulls to make their skull pointed on the top. That was in an unnatural form. I've also learned other things about the psychiatric community being involved and being scraped against that industry, in addition to the medical industry that I've been exposed to all my life, ever since I was born at the age of 2 weeks getting a kidney removed. I've looked at the parts of the mind pertaining to the consciousness versus the subconsciousness, towards what controls what. The left controls the right controls the left. I've looked at various habits, stimulations of habits. I've also looked at artificial intelligence, towards how that it entices various dorphozones in the brain that is basically addictive, probably as addictive as heroin or tobacco or cocaine or alcohol, because once more, it is something that is controlling the mind, and if you can control the mind, you can control ordinarily the body. You know, the individual that I talked to just about 2 or 3 nights ago in Grand Rivers, Kentucky, he used that as an excuse that was the primary reason why the Homo sapiens down here used religion either against or for people, was to basically control them either out of fear or out of guilt pertaining to shame. And you know, looking at it from his perspective, from a manipulating perspective, I can, validate and say, the words that individual was telling me about is absolutely correct. Especially knowing what the Roman Catholic Empire was trying to do whenever an individual by the name of Martin Luther broke away from their indoctrinations, because he himself said that it was not right, that it was wrong, and basically become a target for that particular reason that started the Lutheran Church. I think I've already explained that, but I'll go ahead and explain it again. But in a way, I can see where by cornering up this madman pertaining to Putin is giving him basically two different options because of the lack of men not being trained, or the fact that he don't have enough ammunition, bombs, jeeps, airplanes, tanks, whatever being made, that you're basically cornering him up into a corner to the degree that either A, he's going to go full-fledged nuclear, which I tend to wonder that that's not what the concept of a great deal of people upon this planet is wishing for, hoping for, including various individuals that works for our government authorities right here in America. Once more, it's easier to die off the problem than it is to face the problem. And it's reached a point because of pride and stupidity. I guess you'd use stupidity just as much as you would pride. But the Bible says that my people are destroyed because of lack of knowledge. But you tend to wonder which is the greatest that's working on these people towards actually wanting this to be done, regardless whether they're wanting it to be done directly or indirectly, regardless whether they're doing it consciously or subconsciously. You have to look at the facts, the way that we are cornering this individual in this year anniversary that we're coming up on, towards either making him, forcing their hand towards going all nuclear, or reaching out to somebody like China in the degree towards actually taking another superpower, which will be two major superpowers now, that will be directed against the American people. And the thing about it is, this is where I stand with this subject matter that I'm talking about. It is not the American people that has put us in this predicament. Tractor just got through going by. They're starting to spread fertilizer on the fields right here on about the 21st of February, which is very abnormal. Yesterday was about 70 degrees, 65 degrees. Today it's almost that warm again. We're seeing very abnormal temperatures here in America. And I think the world in general is seeing very abnormal temperatures. But the predicament that various people have relentlessly put us in is a predicament that's going to be irreversible if they continue to go on the path that they're going on. That's the reason why I make the videos. That's the reason why I put out my own Facebook, YouTube platform, social media advisories out to the world, is because I hope to God that somebody out there will get a hold of this information that other people, like I said, I don't know about the numbers game. I don't know if that individual that just got through talking told you the right numbers about other various wars he may have had. I don't know. I don't know that much. I'm not a war analyst per se. I'm a peace analyst. But I know that the peace analyst obviously went totally upside down. That was the whole primary purpose that I went to LBL, basically in 2009, and planted what I planted out there, because I realized that, you know what, their scheme of that in which what they had started out doing was basically achieving itself. And originally the prophecy was supposed to have been peace, and it wasn't my prophecy. I didn't write the book of Revelations. I didn't predict the book of Revelations. I didn't sit down and edit the book of Revelations. I was only being the messenger of the book of Revelations. Once I realized in 2009, which basically put a 20-year terminology into that in which what I was doing, that's whenever I decided, you know what? The line in the sand has been crossed. Especially whenever they tried to do what they tried to do to me in Kentucky, and then they tried to do with me what they tried to do with me out here in Oklahoma City, Oklahoma, less than 2 years later, towards planting a bomb in the back of my truck. I said, you know what? Enough abuse is enough. Enough rejection, and enough of this type of spiritual demonic resistance movement is enough. That's whenever I draw the line in the sand, and I said, okay, God, I wash my hands of the situation. It's now up to you and them. And whenever I say them, I'm not talking about the phony baloney churches. I'm not talking about the corporate make-believe churches in America. Because in actuality, those are the ones that has put us in the shape that we're in right now. I'm talking about various people that worked in various government positions, regardless whether it was the low end or the high end, that has put us where we are today. And if the other people, the good people, aren't smart enough, intelligent enough, and got enough godly sense about them to see what's happening here, well then, once more, if the world does blow up either by man, or if the world does end, pertaining to God Almighty coming back in flaming fire, taking vengeance upon them who know not God, upon them that obey not the gospel, I have done my part. I have done my part to the degree that I feel like that I could die today, right now, before this video is done, if God deemed it necessary, which hopefully He won't. But I feel like that I have done all that I could do, the same as Noah and other prophets of God, including Jesus Christ, that went up into the mountain and looked down upon the Jerusalem and said, Jerusalem, Jerusalem, I've gathered thee together as a hen would gather her chicks. And you would not listen. That was basically freeing any type of guilt, remorse, consciousness that Jesus Christ at that point in time would have had or could have had, because He knew at that point in time that what that He had done wasn't necessarily in vain, because now we realize that the teachings of Christ has more influence today than even what it did whenever He was walking and talking amongst us. But He realized that at that particular time, His attempts towards reforming, gathering, or rallying the people in the right direction had hit a brick wall. And I think that after that event happened, whenever Jesus went up into the mountain and realized what He was dealing with, on the level that He was dealing with it, that's whenever other steps started taking place in regards towards the end time events regarding the Passover, and basically leading to His capture and His crucifixion. But I truly believe that the day that Christ went up into the mountain and said what He said about Jerusalem gathering her chicks together, that was probably one of the most despairing, depressing times of Jesus' ministry. I still believe that, and I'll always believe that, because at that time, realization has come to Him in understanding that these people was basically untouchable, that they had reached the point of being blasphemers themselves, in the degree that that was the very weaponry or tool that they was going to use against Him, towards accusing Him of being a blasphemer, which basically means to be bogus, a fake, a fraud, because they didn't accept who Jesus was. It was the holy men, the priests, the rabbis, that was accusing Him of committing blasphemy, while the whole time the people that was committing blasphemy was in fact the very people that was doing the accusing. Because if they themselves would have been in the right position with God, first of all, they wouldn't have been accusing somebody falsely of committing blasphemy, and secondly, they for darn sure wouldn't have been putting somebody to death that didn't deserve to die. This man was steadily performing miracles for 3.5 years towards helping people, not hurting them. That's why Jesus asked them in the trial, "For what good work dost thou persecute me for?" And one of the soldiers spoke up and said, "For a good work we persecute you not, but for you claiming that you're the Son of God. And we know that you're not the Son of God. You're committing blasphemy. And because you're committing blasphemy, that's what gives us the entitlement or the right to crucify you." So who was actually committing blasphemy that day? It wasn't Jesus. Jesus had been healing the blind, causing the blind to see, feeding the hungry, clothing the naked. Jesus had been spreading the gospel about the good news. Jesus was healing the sick, raising the dead, causing people with afflictions to suddenly get up and walk. Jesus was doing good. But because of the powers at bay, and because of the works of Satan being so powerful at that time, Jesus had hit a brick wall. And in the formation of hitting the brick wall, which was nothing more than a hurdle, it was basically a stopping point in his ministry. That's whenever he come to the conclusion and said what he said about Jerusalem, a hen, and gathering her chicks. Now, this is where I'm going with all this. I've hit a brick wall myself, not a stumbling block, but I've hit a brick wall myself towards people wanting to hinder or stop or even destroy the founder of the Windmill Ministries missions to the degree that they did not want that ministry to succeed. They did not want the ministry to progress because of those that was involved in that movement, either directly or indirectly, either consciously or subconsciously. They will stand, beginning in Kenton, Tennessee, less than 7 or 8 miles from where I live in Obion County, Northwest Tennessee. They will stand in account towards giving an account towards how come they did not dig a little deeper and look into this in more of a serious matter. Not counting all the thousands of churches that I've spread material to back before the internet ever even got started good. I just thank God that I've lived long enough to be able to tell my story and tell it effectively and tell it the way that it needed to be told, in how that various people has set out to destroy my life, beginning right here in my own home state, in my own home county, in my own home community. I thank God that I can tell my story. Now, as things progressively get worse and worse and worse, only thing I can do is feel sorry for the innocent lives that's going to be destroyed, and it already has been destroyed on account of this, with all the drugs and the sexual content, all the perversioness that's happened, all the other things that has obviously occurred in the past 30 plus years, and hopefully, hope to God, that it won't resort into an actual nuclear event. But at this point in time, in the way that I'm looking at this, I don't know which would be more prolonging in being less painful. Would it actually be a nuclear Armageddon? Or would it be towards turning Russia and China against the American people all at the same time and basically leaving us to defend ourselves? I would say at that point in time, it would probably be easier for the American people to go out in the form of a nuclear Armageddon. Because going at it the other way is going to be more crueler. It's going to take more time. You're going to see more suffering. You're probably going to see damages right here in our own land pertaining to stuff being blown up and burned up, just like what's happening with the Ukrainians. I mean, whenever people get enough of this, they'll get enough of it. And whenever they say enough is enough, they'll say enough is enough, and that'll be the end of it. And that's what I'm thinking that various people working for our government is actually hoping for. Like I said, I've seen other ministries stand up that use them for an umbrella, just as the Bible talks about how that the vultures will stand underneath this tree because this tree produces shade for them, that they'll get up underneath that tree. The thing about it is, they've never gotten up underneath my tree. And besides that, I'm not the tree. All I am is the leaves on the tree. The tree sheds the leaves every season. People die. People come and go. I'm not the tree. I'm just attached to the tree. But that's the reason why that they claim that they didn't want to have any dealings with me or become affectionate or partner up with the Windmill Ministries, is because they had made it up in their mind that I was attached to the wrong trunk. They thought that I was attached to the trunk of Satanism. And the whole time, it wasn't the founder that was attached to the Satanism trunk. It was them, either the cowards or the manipulators that never had really truly given their hearts and lives over to God, that has allowed for this to fester and get in the shape that it's in. And I'm just afraid that if we continue much longer in this, if you think that we've seen horror, if you think that we've seen sorrow, if you think that we've seen bad times, we ain't seen bad times yet. If somebody don't get a handle on this situation towards how that it's unfolding, it's only going to miraculously get worse. Now, I realize, looking at the prophecies that I didn't have nothing to do with personally, either in the four Matthew, Mark, Luke, John, or even the book of Revelations, the Gospels, I didn't have nothing to do with those, and I realized the prophecies does talk about wars and rumors of wars and earthquakes in diverse places and plagues and pestilences and all the other horrible things that the Bible talks about. I know this. But because I know this, and because I know how that this corrupt, evil society over here in America has done, pertaining to going all the way back to people like Pat Robinson or Oral Robinson or Jimmy Swaggart's ministry or Billy Graham's ministry or PTL ministry, because I know of these things, they're more hesitant towards not wanting to get related to me because they know that I'm on top of it. But I know what I know pertaining to the Bible that talks about that in the last days he will put it in the sickle because the harvest has come. This is talking about the harvest time. This is talking about end time harvesting of the harvesters that will come forth in the last days that will basically sever the wicked from among the just. Now you wonder how come all these horrible, horrible things continue to keep happening to not only America but the world. It's because people have bitten the hand that has fed them, and now the Heavenly Father has lifted his global protection away from society, and because of it, the devil is making heyday with them. And I'm just wondering how far the devil is actually willing to go in proving his point about the very things that not only I'm talking about, but about what they're talking about right here on this newscasting agency. I don't know about the facts pertaining to some of the numbers that they're putting out. I just know that whenever you see things coming out of our president's mouth about Third World War, Armageddon, and you see how topsy-turvy that everything has become, you have to start to wonder, okay, what is the next step? What's next? I think I heard that from Hillary Clinton whenever something happened with her and her husband, or possibly it was the Benghazi deal. And it may have been whenever she was running against Donald Trump, that one of her cliches was, okay, what's next? What's next? Every time there's a massive shooting here in America, or something horribly, something goes bad, I've said this before, I said it like within an hour or two right before the major earthquake hit over in Syria and Turkey, and if you don't believe me, you look it up yourself. But every time an event happens like this, all it does is diminish the things that people has already got pertaining to the resources, and it makes things that much harder on everybody else. Now, right now, with our planet being so big and everybody having all these major resources, right now, I'm just going to use this as an example real quick. Right now, let's picture the Earth, okay, in a circle, and let's say you got an event over here, and then you have an event over here, and then you have a drought over here, and then you have all the burning happening in Australia over here, and then you had the water system that began to start getting restricted. Then you got the earthquake. Then you got what happened in, 2001, pertaining to the shifting of the tsunami that killed 500,000 people. Then you have something else over here. Then you have something else over here. Every time those events happen, yes, they pull together on a global level, and all of a sudden, resources that's over here, and here, all of a sudden now start going to wherever that problem is over here. But what it's doing, it's straining all the other places with all the other resources, because now the resources has gotten smaller. What's more, everything is based around supply and demand, and whenever you have more of a demand and you have supply, then it starts to backfire again towards price hikes, people taking advantage, towards gouging people. And that's one of the reasons why that I say that the commercial oil petroleum tycoons need to all go to jail, is because we have set back in America. I can't vouch for everybody else, but since I've been a kid, old enough, before I was even old enough to start driving, I have seen the oil petroleum industry use the same tactics again and again and again and again towards telling people, oh, there's an oil shortage, or oh, this, or oh, we're competing this, or oh, I've seen them do it. Now, I know 5 or 6 times in my lifetime they'll drive the prices up and then they'll settle back down. But whenever they settle them back down, they'll always settle them down within a quarter, 50 cents. It looks like this time they're settling them down to about $1 higher than what they originally was, towards $2 a gallon whenever Donald Trump was president. They continue to keep doing this. They continue to keep adding misery and sorrow and problems into people's lives, because I remember whenever it happened, I think the third time in the 70s, that basically it was so bad whenever they drove interest up to about 24%, that basically little mama papa businesses all over America started buckling, started going in the hole, especially your farming industry, and it basically weeded out everybody that was farming anywhere from 60 to 250 acres. And then all of a sudden you had your conglomerate farmers, that now farmers, if they're not farming at least 12 to 1,500 acres, most of them farm 3,000 and 4,000 acres, ain't even considered a farmer anymore. Hardly. Not completely, but hardly. In other words, kind of like the retail industry that come in with Walmart. I'm just going to use them for an example. I know there's more out there other than Walmart. There's Walgreens and everybody else, Kmart, Big K, all them other ones. But Walmart started putting pressure on all the little retailers to the degree that they couldn't keep up with them. They couldn't compete. And the next thing you know, this mama papa went out of business. Next thing you know, this mama papa went out of business. Next thing you know, this mama papa went out of business. Well, in the process of them doing that, they actually portrayed their own people of the promises that their father originated towards telling the American people during Walter Bush's administration, Bush Sr., that they would always use American products and sell American. Well, whenever the old man died, the family turned against his word. And then they started going to third world entities towards getting flat screens TVs and having them sent overseas over here for $50 to $75 less than what they could purchase them, somebody that was making American made. In the meantime, we had factory after factory after factory that was shutting down, not just in the TV commercial industry, but also in making shoes, making clothes, putting parts on cars, making parts that was putting on cars, and etc. They stabbed the American people in the backs. In the meantime, all the people suffered on account of it. In other words, because of NAFTA, they got the cart in front of the horse whenever it come to competing on a global level. We was doing okay competing with England and Europe and Germany and other smaller countries, including even China after World War II, because we was considered the smokestack industry of the world. We was leading in every industry imaginable, from farming to agriculture to science to medical to aviation to on and on and on. We was leading, but we lost our edge whenever the computer come on board. Whenever they said, well, let's work with NAFTA towards free trade. Okay, but no one was smart enough to look at fair trade. That's the reason why Donald Trump come on board, and he started putting tariffs on China goods and putting tariffs on other goods because he looked at the situation and realized, wow, the American people are taking a beating, ain't they? And we was. And we still are whenever it comes to fair trade. Okay? But at the same time, I'm looking at the problems that the American politicians has dug for the American people in general in not producing safety and not putting fire blocks on all this technology pertaining to computer software and smartphone technology, etc. And now they've allowed for all this other stuff to come on board that's now affecting our children's minds. And I'm just seeing one exacerbated problem after another to the degree that what is going to be the end results pertaining to the Russian and the Ukrainian war.
And so we have to decide, that could sort of dovetail to what we need to do at this point. How will this end? How long is this going to go on? I mean, we have to decide what our tolerance is. Meaning, are we prepared for a multi-year potentially, which I think could very well be the case, of a sort of lower grade, protracted war, another Afghanistan, another Vietnam type of experience in more of a proxy setting where we would be providing some kind of open-ended support for Ukraine as the front begins to sort of ossify.
First of all, we're not dealing with sheep herders and goat herders any longer. We're not dealing with people that didn't have the mindset of the superpower mindset. We're dealing with people, some very, very crafty, educated people, and if you go back into their DNA towards who they actually was, towards back in the Vikings and beyond, they're very, very aggressive people. You got to look at the statistics in what you're actually looking at here. Okay? But secondly, the Russian people is in fact a superpower. And they got just as much capability of causing radiation destruction as any other superpower. So that automatically puts them in a whole brand new category other than the Afghanistan war. The Afghanistan war was bad enough. And what we done over there by walking away from that war, and 11 days later, the Afghanistan people laying down and allowing for the Taliban and all those other terrorist groups to take control of our own personal equipment over there, was an event that was so abrupting. My son called me the day after and said, Dad, if there's ever been a time that we have to worry about now Armageddon coming from the Middle East, it's now, because of what we done by walking away and leaving, if I'm not mistaken, not millions, but billions of dollars worth of equipment over there that could be salvaged. He said if there's ever been a time for the Middle East to rise in regards towards Armageddon, he said that what happened in Afghanistan had just opened that possibility. And he was right. My son was right. But there's been all other kinds of mistakes that has occurred above and beyond that has left vacuums. You know, we wanted to use the concept towards wanting to defeat Saddam Hussein by bringing stability to that region and basically eradicating the very axis of evil. But at the same time, our American government politicians know that whenever they was doing that they was not actually attacking the true evildoers. The evildoers was coming from Saudi Arabia. But because they had done already partnered up with them so tightly with the oil production petroleum tycoons, well, they couldn't go after them, even though they knew that it was them, the ones that had been exploited pertaining to the Antichrist and the follower of the Antichrist of biblical Bible prophecy. They turned their backs on the truth, and that's whenever the American government went left instead of right. And the church world at that time, the corporate church world, supported it. And as far as I'm concerned, the various churches around here done too as well. The thousands and thousands of churches that I touched and affected and went to, each one of them, either through their front door or their back door, that knew about the prophecies, they have set idly by and let this fester. They have let it snowball at the expense of trying to destroy the very individual that's talking in behind the camera right now. Now that, my friends, is the gospel. That is the truth. Now, whether or not anybody out there wants to own up to the truth, that will be up to them. Obviously, they're still trying to keep it under wraps. Out of sight, out of mind. Out of sight, out of mind. You know, it's kind of like my buddy this morning was talking about classified and top secret material. How come a government that claims to be a legitimate government would want to underhandedly lie or prevent or keep things from their own citizens? I mean, if they're doing this much stuff that they're ashamed of or that they don't want us to know about, maybe somebody needs to investigate why they are doing all this stuff that is considered classified to the American people and to the world. Besides that, look now at what that they have done by releasing all this information out there that was classified, that wasn't supposed to have been looked at according to them. That now that even our allies, that at one time used to be our allies, are questioning, my God, can we trust these people? They're actually portraying their own people. So if they're going to portray their own people, do you think maybe that they would portray us? So there's a lot of ins and outs towards what has occurred here in the past 30 plus years, and that's the reason why I say what I say. There's a lot of these people locally that has taken a part of this that are going to have a great deal to be held accountable for. And they probably think that I'm blowing smoke because obviously this is how that they have seared their consciousness to begin with by believing in a lie rather than believing in the truth. So these people, as far as I'm concerned, they're already damned. They're already doomed. But the bad thing about it is they're wanting to doom everybody else. They're wanting to damn everybody else from their successes. And the children of today deserve better than that. The American people today deserve better than that. Those that didn't take a part in all this going back 30 plus years ago deserve better than that. So whenever it comes time of severing the wicked from among the just, I guarantee you, you get to looking at how that God has allowed for Satan to go in with COVID and all these other catastrophes. You've only seen the beginning phases of what's happening. You may as well buckle up and hook up and get ready because the show's on. Coming near a neighborhood near you. And at this point in time, the only thing that me and you or anybody else can do is pray that we're either worthy to escape these things or pray that we are strong enough to endure them. That's exactly what the Kingdom Hall was preaching on Sunday, pertaining to getting people ready for the doomsday scenarios that the Bible talks about that's going to happen in the last days. In the true last days. In the harvesting of the last days.
And solidifying, we get into this war of attrition stalemate situation? Or are we prepared for a new definition of what we would be fine with as far as victory is concerned over there? Because we have other priorities like China and things that we have to be focused on. So that's a political decision for us. But on Putin's end, I don't believe he's going to be stopping so long as he has the ability to keep going.
Boris Rifkin, thank you, my brother.
Thanks, Jesse.
We have final thoughts. Next. Everyone forgets about you when you come back home from war. And you know what, that was probably too far. Maybe not everyone. But it feels like everyone forgets and moves on about you whenever you come back from war. I remember when I got back from Iraq, and I have a wonderful family and things like that. I don't want to act like anyone turned their back on me, but I was in such a dark place, such a violent place mentally. And more than anything, I felt alone. And you don't feel like there's anyone around you who understands or even cares. You just feel alone, even when you're not alone.
And I want to comment on what he's talking about. There's been a many of people that's come by here and talked to me. There's been a many of people that I talk to on a day-to-day level, a week-to-week level, a month-to-month level, that are militarily inclined. I've never went to military. I've never seen a hot zone. I pray to God that I don't, and maybe others will not too as well. But I also realize that without our military pretending to patriotic sacrifices, that we as a society would not exist if we didn't have that type of ability. Does that make that ability right? No. But what it does do is make us a survivalist nation, to the degree that even though we're a young nation, and we're very young whenever it comes to our ethics, we're very young whenever it comes to our history, we're still a survival nation. But just because we are a survivalist nation does not mean that we're supposed to abuse our rights towards other nations that are thousands of years older than we are. So because of our inexperience, and because the way that Satan has bamboozled so many people, I tend to wonder that that's what has happened here. But that still don't make it right. Still don't make it right. But at least it gives us a foundation to look at to say, well, this is probably the reason why that it occurred, was because of this, and this. And of course, the main course in all that is the supernatural powers that have grown and intensified so strongly since 1986, since basically Congress allowed for occults to be tax exempt, that since then we have been bombarded by all kinds of paranormal, satanic, occultist type activities here in America that has basically put us where we are right now.
Wife, kids, whatever you got, you feel alone. I love organizations like Boulder Crest, because Boulder Crest finds that veteran and pulls him out of that funk without a bottle of pills, without messing up his mind, brings him from where he was to where he needs to be. Go to bouldercrest.org and give today to help these vets, all right? Help them, help the vets. bouldercrest.org.
You're watching The First Free Speech Delivered Daily.
And that is so beneficial in so many people's lives that have served. I want to say thank you for allowing for me to be a part of this recording. I want to say good luck to all of us. God bless our troops. God bless America. God bless our endeavors towards where we go from here on. I want to say that
but putting an asterisk there, depending on how you identify, I find this to be extremely dehumanizing. What could be more dehumanizing than putting an asterisk in the description of someone's cultural heritage? This is what anti-Semites and white supremacists do to erase Jews. They won't write out the entire word. They use an asterisk instead. And so he's doing this here.
Anyways, I want to say thank you. I'm sorry that I couldn't record all of this. What she's talking about is very, very significant and true in regards towards the anti-Semitism that has inundated this country. Once more, that goes back into what I was talking about in regards towards this paranormal behavior that has been unleashed here in America. And if it ain't been unleashed in one area, it's been unleashed in another. And if we as a society, especially a true Christian society, ain't smart enough to identify these things and to pull together in defeating these things, instead of us defeating it, it will defeat us. And this is basically the parallel where I'm at right now in regards towards me making all these videos and wishing for everybody good luck, praying that heaven help us all. But in the meantime, I sit and watch things going backwards, one step forward and two steps back. And I'm just wondering how far is going to be too far before we have reached the inedible of no return. Thank you. Good luck. And as we end our program all the time by saying shalom, and pray for our great nation. God bless.